The title of the talk was, what I do as my day job, or as I tend to call it, my life in ruins. And again, this has been slightly spoilt by the bottom half of the caption has been removed from the picture. So sorry, you'll have to bear with this. There's slight technical glitches, as in I don't know what the hell I'm doing. Right, anyway, carry on from here. My career as an archaeologist is what Jean asked me to talk about. So, say, a life in ruins, these are some of the more ruinous sites that I've dealt with. Why did I want to become an archaeologist? Well, as a child, and here I am with my father, last known photograph of my father, actually, is out of interest, who was an old Northamptonian himself, as was my mother. But there's, the reason I got this picture is there's the three things as a child I wanted to be. One was a Royal Marine Commando, the other was a scuba diver, and the third one was an archaeologist. And I'd also like you to note from this picture is an absolute classic example of why your mother should never lift you out of the pram by your ears. Right, slight sidetrack. I said my parents were both in Northampton. This is my father's apprentice toolbox, which I have in my workshop. And you can just see inside the lid there, you just see it says Northampton. It actually says 11 Great Russell Street, Northampton, which I believe was demolished as part of slum clearance in the 50s or 60s and no longer exists as a row of houses. So that's where my father came from. And for my mother, her parents lived on 2 Monks Park Road, where he was the local coal merchant, as well as being a poacher, fence, black marketeer, and various other bits and pieces. And my grandmother, Daisy, she ran the greengrocers from the scullery. So if you anybody know the area of the town, where the cinema was, or still is the back of it, what used to be the coal yard was sold to become a car park for the cinema in the 1970s. So slight sidetrack, just proving my Northampton credentials. Right, so I did go off and join the Marines. I joined as a reserve. I am in that picture somewhere. I will not identify myself and embarrass myself. It's all far too long ago. So yes, I went off. I did 8 years, various exercises, mountaineering, Arctic survival, the usual bits and pieces. So I am technically a fully trained, steely-eyed dealer in death. I also went off and learned to do the scuba diving, which I learnt that while I was working on the Mary Rose project, which is now 40 years this year. It shows you how old I am. And these are some of the, well, obviously not the hard hat diving on the wreck of the Royal George, which is on the left-hand side there. But so I did a number of years in marine archaeology, looking at a couple of dozen shipwrecks over Britain and parts of Southern Ireland. And I also became an archaeologist. And this probably about sums it up in terms of archaeology. Why I got into it is something you can do and get incredibly dirty and nobody shouts at you. It's brilliant. Although I have been known to have to strip off in the car park outside the house before I come in on particularly wet and muddy days. I'd like to draw your attention particularly to the very last frame in the sequence here. Archaeologists have the most mind-numbing job on the planet. When you're finding nothing, it is the mind-numbing job on the planet. Right, so this is where it all started. Jean asked me to specifically put in some stuff about the Mary Rose, or as we referred to it at the time, the hairy nose. This is the hull as recovered in the dock at Portsmouth before it was put upright. This is the position it was lying on in the seabed, and you can see a figure in the distance on the bows to give you some idea of scale. So whilst I was there was from about 1982, 83 onwards. And there's me, long hair, bad moustache, typical of the era. That's got to be worth a donation, and just for that picture alone. This is, again, you can see the hull stretching out behind me. This is right down on the keel before it's turned upright. That big structure there at the back, that's the mast step where the main mast would have gone, and these are the floor timbers of the ship. And this is me cleaning out the mud and detritus from underneath the planking. So whilst we were there, I was there, we were involved in the rotation of the ship into its upright position as you see it now. So this is the massive bit of civil engineering that was undertaken to do all the work and to slowly crane it over with you can see these huge red structures here. These are the big hydraulic rams that lowered and turned the whole structure, which is about 400 tons. So it's quite a delicate process, but with big machinery. And that's what it looked like then. I mean, it's obviously all been rebuilt. The completely new museum has been built around it at the cost of, I think it's about £17 million. Huge museum, very, very good. Very interesting and innovative display. All been rebuilt and all restructured. And my claim to fame is you can just see on the left-hand side, I'm assuming you can all see the cursor. That is my foot and leg, because I was asked not to be in the photograph because we were going to have Stuart in the photograph because he was the smallest member of the team. It made the ship look bigger. Don't know why, but that's what they decided to do. And that's me with Keith underneath the ship as it's being lowered. And these are, you can see here, these are the big hydraulic rams for doing the lowering and the turning of the ship. So that's 1983, 84. So other archaeology I did. This is some more maritime stuff. Well, vaguely maritime because it's a shipwreck, as you can see in the foreground. And it is underwater, but only underwater at high tide. This is the team led by a colleague of mine, Nigel Nailing. Didn't mean to do that. Nigel Nailing, who is now Associate Professor of Archaeology at Lampeter University and doesn't behave at all ridiculously like he did in this photograph. This was the Magor Pill wreck, 12th century wreck off the Severn foreshore, which we excavated at low tide, which meant that we had fun and games, and we had big machinery on, lowered off. These are big barges to bring the machinery off to dig down either side of the hull. The hull remains here, and these are the trenches, and this is the bit that I was involved in, was the tunnelling underneath. Out the other side, you can see Nigel there, to put the frame under to lift it up. But because we were working low tides, we were doing day and night. So we were also back at 4 o'clock in the morning for the low tide in the middle of the night. So highly entertaining stuff. And I'm pretty sure Health and Safety wouldn't allow us to do this nowadays, because when they were machining the spoil out here, we just used to hide in these tunnels. These are little tunnels that we're digging in, and they're just the size of one person. So we'd hide in the tunnel, the machine bucket would scoop the muck out, and then we'd come out and do a bit more digging. So nice and safe and well-controlled environment. We also did quite a bit of foreshore stuff around on the northeast coast as well. This is Cleethorpes Beach at low tide, with a fun fair in the distance. And I did 1 or 2 bits and pieces for Open University to do with the coastline and the loss of coastal heritage. Another foreshore site, you can see I did a lot of foreshore and intertidal stuff early on. This is the remains of an 18th century alum house on the Yorkshire coast at Saltick Bay. Very well-known site, another scheduled monument. Unfortunately, it's washing away. It gets washed by the tide twice a day. But this is part of the very first chemical industry that was created in the north of Britain. We also had a lot of more ephemeral stuff. This is a set of trackways leading to this very unassuming and natural looking feature. It's actually a man-made harbour for bringing ships in to load the alum and various other minerals that are exploited along the coastline. This one's at Ravenscar, or Peak as it's known. There's a whole dock complex there, quite a complicated, interesting setup, but very difficult to visit. You only get about an hour at low tide, and you have to walk for nearly an hour to get around the cliff end. So it's a bit of a dangerous one to get cut off, but very interesting site. And there's also stuff eroding out of the foreshore as well. This is again another alum plant at Saltick. This is now all gone. This is all collapsed and disappeared, which is a lot of what I do, is the threatened archaeology, either through erosion or natural forces or through developer-led redevelopments and rebuilding. Another one from Saltick, very enigmatic, very difficult to spot. But this series of square post holes runs off into the distance, and there's another row down there, and then there's another row along there. We have no idea what that is. Sorry, jumped ahead. No idea what that is, so suggestions on a postcard have been most gratefully received. And one of the last big coastal projects I did was the Rapid Coastal Zone Assessment from Whitby down to the Norfolk border, where we recorded a lot of stuff, home industry, shipwrecks, and a lot of this stuff, which is now rapidly disappearing. Second World War and First World War, coastal defence, pillboxes and all sorts of bits and pieces. Doesn't sound like the most exciting of archaeology, but it's disappearing quite quickly. There's very little left. And we were finding stuff that wasn't, you would think it'd all be recorded because it's only Second World War, it's not that long ago, but we were finding stuff that hadn't been recorded, nobody knew about, saying it's all now rapidly disappearing. But this is what I do in my bread and butter work, big holes in the ground. This is a church job at Fewston, near Harrogate. This is typical of the sites I'm on, working alongside or trying to get in before the contractors come in and dig vast holes in the ground. And it's not as glamorous as it is on the television. You often work in very awkward, close and difficult conditions to fit in around the construction programme. This particular site is a site at Norton, where we had some Roman buildings and a Roman, in fact, the chap in the middle background there is actually stood on top of the Roman road, which gives you an idea of how much ground level has built up in the past. This one led to a small publication. We found some very interesting bits and pieces there, but this is very much what I do. It's in amongst the active construction side of it. So we only get a chance to look at little sections, little sort of small trenches here and there. We don't get a chance to do big area excavations with certainly the level of commercial work I do. But what do you find? All sorts. And this is where I end up knowing a tiny amount about a lot of different things and knowing a lot of people who know a lot more about a small number of things, or specialists. This feature came up for the redevelopment for Bernardo's home. It's an octagonal garden feature that would have held an armillary globe and formal fountain in the grounds of a posh house on the outskirts of Ripon. So again, when you first see it, you think, what on earth is that? And you try and make it into all sorts of weird and wonderful corn drying kilns and alien landing craft and all sorts of bits and bobs. Similarly, usual stuff of archaeology, walls and ditches is what archaeology is often typified by. And here, this is back to Norton. These are all Roman, series of 3 Roman buildings, phases of Roman buildings. You've got one big wall there, another one there, and then another one in here. Then again, walls and floors. This is a farmhouse, Yorkshire farmhouse up in the Moors National Park. Again, interesting wee feature, but trying to unravel what all the phases are and what all the different bits and pieces mean, and why has some of it been repaired in cobble, some of it been repaired in slate, some of it been repaired with slabs of stone. It's difficult, and it's what's the challenge of the job. You also get more enigmatic structures. This is the job over in Cumbria, just right almost to Carlisle, in some woodland. And you get these things. These are not hobbit holes. This is not for where the fairies live. These are actually the remains of small charcoal kilns that were developed in the later medieval period, early post-medieval period, for exploiting the landscape for producing charcoal for early industry and smelting. So you need to be able to sort of spot some very odd looking things, and what looks almost entirely natural from one direction can be obviously man-made from another. Churches. One of the reasons I'm involved with the work in Northampton is because of the church and the Church Conservation Trust, who I've done a couple of jobs for. This one's Fewston, excavating graveyards, excavating cemeteries, excavating bodies. We do quite a lot of it, and as you can see from the image in the top left, archaeology is not the most dignified of professions either, but you sometimes get some very awkward ones. The bottom left view is inside the tomb that the right-hand side photograph is taken in. This is me wriggling around in the vault of George Lister, who was buried at Fewston Cemetery in the late 19th century. And we had to try and get him out, get the remains out as best we could before we redeveloped the site into, or that part of the site into a very, very nice cafe and visitor centre. Sometimes we get some fantastic results when we're doing human remains. This is again Fewston, a little bit of an atypical site. The level of preservation was startlingly good. We had coffin plates, we had a large number of skeletons, 143 skeletons, with a lot of pathology, indications of things like broken noses, wearing corsets, pipes, evidence for rickets, scurvy, all those bits and bobs. These are some of the more salacious examples. This was a chap, skeleton 88. He had a lot, he was buried in a lot of stuff. He had silver coin in his pocket, mother of pearl button boots, belt and braces in true Yorkshire style. Also had a healed blade wound to the back of his head and various other indications. Unfortunately, it was an unnamed grave, but the injuries he's got and the date of the coin, I strongly felt that he was probably a survivor from the Napoleonic Wars. And the community group who did the work on this, they researched and they've come up with 2 or 3 possible names. One of which name is very, his circumstances are very close to who this could be, but unfortunately we can't actually prove it. And they did produce a very nice book on this as well. Another, just again, still at Fewston, Richard Gill, the black skeleton. He's only black because he's been stained by the oak from his coffin, the tannin from his coffin. But a black skeleton with white teeth is quite odd looking. And the most odd thing was his wig that was floating around in the water in his grave at the time before we bailed it out, which is a little bit weird. Not to mention his socks that had survived as well, complete with his toenails inside his socks. That was fairly unpleasant. Talking of bodies, I don't do, or haven't done this for a long time, but I don't always stick to the strictly archaeological side of things. I did a little bit of forensic archaeology for an organisation with a snappy title of the Independent Commission for the Location of Victims' Remains, which is ICLVR, or as it's known in Ireland, is the Commission for the Disappeared. And they are tasked with looking for and recovering the remains of victims from the Troubles who were abducted and shot by mostly the Republican paramilitary organizations, particularly the IRA and the INLA. But we would work on information from people who provided details through the Good Friday Agreement, and we would then go out and search through bogs, or in this case, a reclaimed bog, in order to try and find the remains of the victims, and they could be then returned to their families and reburied. And we've so far, I think we've had, it's 10 of the 13 that named on the list for the disappeared. And this site, in fact, that marker there shows that is where actually back. That shows where we had 2 bodies from that point just there. But it was a very long, it's been going for many, many years, very worthwhile project. And this is where life of an archaeologist is mind-bogglingly numb and boring, because we would strip anything up to 2 or 3 square kilometers of a bog trying to find one body and then reinstate it. So very long-term, very draining, very intense project. Right, so away from the buried archaeology, I also do a certain amount of buildings archaeology as well, historic building recording. This is the John Marr building in Hull, one of the early fisheries from the height of the fishing industry in Hull, now sadly derelict and graffiti strewn and highly damaged, and I believe has now been demolished, but it was a very nice example of a 1920s Art Deco building built at the height of the wealth of the fishing fleets out of Hull. So we do some of the 20th century stuff, but we also do a lot of the older buildings. This is a 19th century, late 18th, early 19th century barn in the Dales, which has seen better days, up for possible redevelopment. This was a particularly odd one. Stuck on a hillside again in the Dales, terrible condition, blocked up windows, wriggly tin roof. You go inside, it's got concrete boskins, but if you look on the back wall here, you can see a magnificent, what's known as a joggled voussoir fireplace, which is probably 17th century, maybe even slightly earlier. So we're actually looking at the remains of a very good quality, upper middle class 17th century house, which has been converted into a cattle byre because it's gone downhill over the years. So we do a lot of this work, recording these barns prior to often conversion and restoration. But it's amazing what you'll find in a barn. This is one of my favourite barns. Typical farmer's barn in the Dales, full of dead agricultural machinery. But you see up on the hay loft floor here, there's a little red object there. It's turned out to be a Mini. How he got it up there, how he's going to get it down, I don't know. But I do know that the floor was completely rotten, and I'm amazed that it was actually still up there and not down on the ground floor. Churches. I seem to spend a lot of my time at the moment dealing with churches. Not always in the graveyard. This one's St Oswald's in Filey, fine medieval church with bits of Viking or interlace scroll work incorporated in some of the stonework. But we are up on the roof. There's a team of us scrambling around on the roof because we were looking at the graffiti. And I spent quite a bit of time recording graffiti on church roofs and various other places, and fascinating subject, and does give an insight into the day-to-day lives of ordinary folk. And because bear in mind, this was recorded 150 years before the television was invented, so you had to do something in the evening. So I know I'll go and carve a ship, image of a ship on the local church roof. That seems a reasonable thing. But the information you can get is incredible. The detail of people who are there, what they were doing, their attitude towards things, it does vary tremendously. And we've got records for all sorts of different occupations, for spring makers, boiler makers, fishmongers, and you get bizarrest graffiti. A colleague of mine recorded graffiti images of pairs of trousers cut into a church roof. Why? No idea. But one of my favorite ones are the declarations of love. Classic, heart with an arrow, initials and a date. However, you sometimes get names and someone's gone back and scrawled out one of the names. So the path of true love is not always as peaceful as one would hope. One of the questions I get asked repeatedly is, do you find any treasure? Oh, I bet you find treasure all the time. Oh, I bet you found loads of treasure over the years. Cool. Have you got what's the best bit of treasure you've ever found? The answer is, I rarely find treasure. Metal detectorists find treasure because they're looking for treasure. I tend to find ditches and walls and broken pottery. And if I'm really lucky, occasionally a nice horseshoe. But recently I've been involved in a couple of treasure sites. This is one of my volunteers giving me a hand on a site in North Yorkshire. Detectorist got a big signal, dug a hole, found something, reported it, and then I was asked to go and do an excavation on it. And the site was this. Doesn't look terribly exciting. That's a lump of metal there, and that's a big lump of metal there with another one underneath. And then you've got this circular feature here with these discs around it. And that's what that is. It is the central iron. It's a central iron boss, known as a carinated boss, with these are silver discs and stars. And this is a 5th to 7th century Anglo-Saxon warrior burial. And the iron objects are a couple of spears that were in the grave with him. Unfortunately, the preservation was so poor that there's no bone or anything else, no timber surviving. We had some mineral preserved remains around. You can just see around here the edge of the shield. We've got some mineral preserved remains, so we can say it was a wooden shield with a leather hide over the top with iron strips with these decorated pattern of it's tempting to say that they're stars and suns, but it hasn't been studied by experts yet, so we're not entirely sure. This has only just gone, last couple of weeks, it's gone to the Yorkshire Museum, where it will go on display sometime in the future, but it's still going through the treasure process at the moment. And this is another happy metal detectorist. You can guess that he's found something because of the big grin on his face and he's pointing. This was a really nice chap, Colin, this really nice chap. Again, you did the right thing, found something, reported it. The council then funded me to go and excavate the site. And this is what we found, or part of what we found. This is all early medieval, late Viking, early medieval. We had two of these strap ends, a matched pair, one slightly smaller than the other. That's a gold fingering, literally 3 minutes out of the ground. And you might not recognize that. We had 13 of these. They are silver ingots used as trade. We also had 5 silver armbands of the Irish sea style as well, and lots of other fragments of silver and bits and bobs and pieces. Again, this is off with a treasure inquest at the moment, and we'll probably go to, or Skipton Museum is the closest museum for that one. And community archaeology. I do a certain amount of community archaeology. This is the gang from the St Aidan's project in West Yorkshire, back in dawn of prehistory, back in the late 1980s, no, late 1990s, where we excavated there. This is the team, and the left hand and the bottom photograph is what happens when you work in a quarry and you get the Land Rover stuck on the access road because it rains too much. So it's not all plain sailing, and as I said with the earlier cartoon, it is a good excuse to get incredibly dirty as well. This group at the top here is a non-archaeology group doing archaeology. This was a group of people who were looking after the woodland, Buckwood at Bradford, Thackley Woods. That was just outside Thackley, which is a lovely village, which is next to a village called Idle, which has, would you believe, the Idle Working Men's Club, which has the largest worldwide membership of any working men's club in the world, because everybody wants a membership card that says, I'm an idle working man. Anyway, this was a group of conservation volunteers who were interested in the archaeological features in the woodland. We did an excavation on a feature in the woodland, which turned out to be an Iron Age roundhouse, and in the walls associated with the roundhouse, they found quite a large amount of prehistoric cup and ring marks, and they applied to Historic England, and it all became a scheduled monument, so much to their delight. So out of literally small acorns, some mighty interesting archaeology can grow. This is the, back to Fewston, this is the group of people there who were involved, again, primarily to build a heritage centre for the church, but we did extra work on the remains of the vicarage and the delightfully named Toad Hole, which was the abandoned part of the early post-medieval village. Sometimes managed to get community groups to get involved with commercial archaeology. This is the site at Norton, the big Roman site, and the gang of volunteers who started off at the Conisbrough Castle dig came along for a couple of days and excavated part of, it's not very clear, but along here there's a wall that runs up there across the back, another wall comes down here, and then this row of stones are the post pads to support the timbers to support the roof of the building. Very simple Roman building, gable end onto the road, probably a shop and warehouse type structure. But where this chap is here, no, sorry, it's where he is there. It's that just there. He found what he thought was originally like a steel yard, setting a set of scales. But when the find specialists looked at it, they were very, very enthused because it was a type of a pair of tongs for metalworking, type of which she'd never seen in Roman finds before. So, you know, they got a chance to find and excavate some unusual and rare archaeology. Right, so the bit you've all really been waiting for, the bit about the old Black Lion. You're probably far more familiar with the detail of the pub than I am, or the inn, should I say, than I am. We've come into this from having to do a specific job, in other words, to provide documentation to go with the planning applications and the scheduled monument consent, and to fulfill all the heritage obligations that the CCT need in order to do their work and their conversion works and to get it all up to speed. So a lot of it is very commercially focused in terms of tedious paperwork. Again, the side that you don't see on television, the non-glamorous sitting for hours typing reports to find the right form of words to convince people we do know what we're doing and we're not just hacking holes in the countryside for the joy of it. So I tend to deal with, on projects of this scale, with the below ground stuff, and my colleague Jen Dedman, who is I think actually down there at the moment, working with the guys who are doing the stripping out, recording the extra features, historic features within the inn itself. She does all the built archaeology, the above ground stuff, the buildings. So based on her earlier report, very quickly we're going to run through some of the phases for how old we think the building is. Now, I don't know how many of you have seen Jen's report. I know some copies of it have been circulated, and it will be updated with the work that she's doing at the moment. But we've managed, or Jen's managed to work out some preliminary phasing for the old Black Lion. And this one on the left in blue is the first, what we can work out as the first phase, the earliest surviving parts of the building, which we believe is probably dates to before the 1516 fire. So we have a couple of chimney stacks there and there, and two of the principal walls, the lower part of the principal walls, survive. Then the next phase of building after that fire and rebuilding is shown here on the right in the green. So we think this is now moving into the 17th century. And again, it's walls built on top of walls and possibly repairs of chimney stacks. Sometimes it's quite easy in buildings to work out what came first and second. The hard part is actually putting a date on it, because if you're building in stone, a lump of stone is a lump of stone. And unless it's got any distinctive tool marks or dates on it or something like that, it can be very difficult to work out how old it is. But we know relatively how old it is which came first or second. So we then move through into the later phases. You can see with the top, there's the dates there as to how old the bits and pieces are. And it's quite surprising that a lot of what survives that you see for the main part of the front of the pub and elements of the long run of stables down the east side are actually quite old, possibly older than people think. And so this is what it looks like on the ground. So you're probably all familiar with this view of the pub. So we have here in yellow down on the bottom left, we have the first phase of brickwork. Come on, there we go. First phase of brickwork, or sorry, stonework, shall I say. This is possibly surviving from pre the 1516 fire. So that's quite early. We then have the second phase above it, which is built on top. And you can see quite clear, ignoring the yellow line, dotted line I put on, when you stand there and look at it, you can see there's a very distinct change in the color of the stone, the size of the stone, the way it's been laid, the way it's been built. So you've got your first phase here, second phase on top. The roofs have no doubt been rebuilt numerous times. Then where you've got the main body of the pub at on the road frontage, early 18th century, probably post 1675 fire. So there's your rebuilds there, because you have this nice vertical join between the two, which gives you that distinct phasing, which tells you which is first and which is second. So at the moment, Jen is trying to refine that, because they're stripping off the modern plaster and taking out a lot of the modern fittings and fixtures and stuff. Hopefully she's going to be able to get back in maybe to refine this a little bit more. Right, the two stars that you see here are where I had two test pits. Now, part of the scheme for rehabilitating the pub is to dig all the way along this wall, front to back, one end to the other, a almost metre deep, metre or half metre wide at the bottom, metre and a half wide at the top ditch, which will be left open in order to reduce the damp problems that are in the pub. Because what happens is over time in churchyards, they get higher and higher and higher, because as you dig a new grave, put a new body in, fill it in again, the soil's not removed. So churchyards get higher and higher. That's why when you look at any churchyard, you will see that it stands, well, some of them I've seen 6, 8, 9 feet higher than the surrounding roads, because they've just been used over and over again. So the levels rise. And now, of course, if you've got a building that's hard up against it, that means damp's going to get in. So there are huge damp problems in the old Black Lion. And this is the only real effective way of curing it or ameliorating it, is to remove that soil that's built up against the wall. So because the churchyard is a scheduled monument, we had to do some trial excavations, and because there's a whole row of shrubs and trees along this boundary as well, there was only a couple of places I could dig where we weren't destroying plants that were already there, and that's where the 2 stars are. So the first hole, this is the one up against the phase 1 wall, up against the 16th century wall. And the brief I had was to stop digging when we got to an articulated skeleton, an intact skeleton, of which the sad battered remains of one is just there. They are the ribs, just there, and that's his arm. So that'll be the right arm, because you're buried on your back with your head. Sorry, get it right. Your head is to the west, so that, yes, that's right. So you rise and face Jerusalem in the east when Gabriel blows the trumpet at the end of the world. So the head will be under there, which means that this skeleton predates that wall, because his head's been cut off when the foundation trench for that wall was dug. So that's potentially a pre-16th century skeleton. The other interesting thing here, as you can see, there's a little shrub here, and how much disturbance that the roots have done all the way down, including that actually, if I told you that was his arm earlier on, I lied to you. That was actually a tree root. Sorry, that's a tree root there. And that little hole there is an animal burrow, probably a rat tunnel. And the little object that you can see in it, not terribly clearly, is actually a human jaw. So at some stage, when the ground level was lower, rats have got into there and they've been tunneling around in amongst all the burials, and they seem to have decided to drag somebody's jawbone down one of the tunnels. Pretty grim, but not uncommon. We had a nice Saxon cemetery where we had a rat's nest actually inside the skull. They'd gone in through the foramen magnum, the big hole at the base of the skull, and they've made a nice little rat's nest in there in the past. The other test pit we had was the one under the window next to the main body of the pub, and completely out of the blue, completely unexpectedly, this appeared. And this is obviously the Victorians attempting to solve the same problem with the damp that we're trying to solve now. This stonework here and cobblework is not part of the original building, original part of the pub. And this brickwork is all added. It's all Victorian bricks. This is all Victorian bricks, and a brick and a stone wall here. And what they've done is they've dug down the outside of the earlier phase of the pub, and they have filled the bottom half of the trench, as you can see here, with rubble. And they've then laid a very nice brick path along it and built a wall on that side. They've made it look nice and neat and tidy by having pitch bricks on the other side. And it's possible that this is a walkway, either access into the graveyard, or there's a hint on the internally that there may have been a doorway at the end of this footpath, or it could just have been built as a very fancy looking ditch in order to reduce the damp. So part of the work, if it all goes, or when it all goes ahead, will be to excavate this feature and carry it on as another, right for the length of the wall to past that other trial trench that we had, where it would just be an ordinary open grass sided ditch. Whereas this part here, what the aim is at the moment is to expose and consolidate and repair this Victorian feature, so you'll have that running alongside of the pub. And this is just an example of the, how we do the recording of the detail of the remains. And interesting, we had another skeleton. This is part of this is the end of the humerus, the upper arm of a body, which was in here. And so this Victorian wall has cut the chest and head off, another burial, which is common in graveyards, burials, intercut burials, because churchyard's been used for, how old is St. Peter's? 1,000 years maybe. So even if only 10 people a year die and get buried, but obviously there'll be more in plague years and years where there's like big scarlet fever or influenza outbreaks. That's an awful lot of bodies, and they've all got to go in the same area. So of course bodies are intermingled and cut through and reburied and bits and pieces. So, as the Archaeological Survey India says, sustain your heritage and feel glorious. Any questions?